This is going to be a quite important video because we're going to cover the human ear, and the human ear is quite similar to all different types of mammal ears. Not the same, but quite similar. So the human ear will be covered in this video. More specifically, we're going to cover these different structures. So the ear itself is divided into three parts: the outer, the middle, and the inner. So the outer would be this part, the middle would be this part, and the inner would be this part. Now, in terms of the outer structures, we're going to cover the pinna and the tympanic membrane. For the middle, we're going to cover the ear ossicles, which are the three bones. We're not going to cover the eustachian tube. We're going to cover that in a different video. In the inner ear, we're going to cover the oval window, round window, the cochlea, the organ of Corti, and the auditory nerves. We're not going to cover the semicircular canal, and that's to do with balance. That's important for balance. We're not going to cover this video. We're just going to cover the ones which are in color. Alright, so we'll start with the outer ear, because the dot point says describe the anatomy, so that means the structure. So describe the structure and function of these different parts, so the ones that I've got in color, of the pinna, the tympanic membrane, ear ossicles, oval window, round window, cochlea, organ of Corti, and auditory nerve. Alright, so we start with the outer ear. The outer ear is this part of the ear, which is the one that you can see. Parts of it you can see, which would be your earlobe and your ear itself, the ones that you can see from the outside. And that's got the pinna. The pinna is just the inside folds, and it has the auditory canal. That's a canal that leads towards the tympanic membrane, and it's got the tympanic membrane. So these three parts are from the outer ear. We're going to specifically talk about the pinna and the tympanic membrane. So the pinna is flexible cartilage. That's the structure. Again, we're talking about structure first. It has flexible cartilage. Cartilage is bone-like, but not quite bone-like. It's a bit more flexible, and it's funnel-shaped. What I mean by funnel-shaped, it has this kind of shape, right, as opposed to this kind of shape. And that's because of its function. So its function is that it needs to have all of this air is coming in, the sound, and it needs to funnel it inside. It needs to make sure it gets inside the ear to make sure it gets towards the tympanic membrane. That's why it has a funnel shape, right? So structure and function are related. It has the structure is funnel shaped because, and its function is it has to funnel air, and also needs to protect the ear, protection. So that's why we've got that flexible cartilage, because that's still quite protective. That's the first part. That was the pinna. The tympanic membrane. It has three layers. You can see the tympanic membrane is right there. It's towards the end of the auditory canal. So you can imagine air will flow in and get towards the tympanic membrane. So there are three membranes. You just remember, I mean, you don't need to remember names or anything, but you can just remember there's three membranes that make up this tympanic membrane. These membranes will attach to the ossicles. The ossicles are these bones we're going to cover in a second. And there is muscles that keep them tight, and we're going to talk about that more in a second, right? But basically, the tympanic membrane, what happens, and when we talk about air or sound coming in, remember we often make it look like this, but in reality it doesn't look like a wave. It looks more like this, these compression and refraction areas. But what you can imagine is this sound comes in, and whenever a bit of the sound comes in, it will make this actual membrane vibrate. So it will go forward, and it will hit one of these bones, right? So when the refraction parts, the parts where there's less molecules, when that hits, there's going to be less of a push than if the compression part hits. So if the compression part hits, there's obviously going to be more of a push. There's always going to be some push, but it's going to be more of a push when the compression hits than when the refraction hits. Basically, you can imagine the sound comes in, and whenever there's sound molecules hitting that membrane, then you've got some kind of movement. Now these muscles, they keep it tight, right? We want to make sure it keeps it tight, so that any pressure can be felt by the actual membrane. If it's really lax, it wouldn't feel the pressure. So these muscles are just there to keep the membrane tight. What happens when the membrane gets activated is this membrane will push on the first, which is the malleus, the first bone. We're going to cover those more in a second. And if that bone hits the second bone, which is the incus, and the second bone hits the third bone, which is the stapes, right? And then the stapes hit the oval window, and that's the cochlea. So the idea is just to transfer the energy from sound into mechanical. So that's its function. It transforms sound energy into mechanical energy, and it also indirectly activates the cochlea, which we'll cover in a second. Right? So that's the function of the actual tympanic membrane. Right, so next is the middle ear, and the middle ear consists of three bones. We've got the malleus, or the hammer, the incus, or the anvil, and the stapes or the stirrup. Now so the ear ossicles. Ossicles just means making sound. That's oscillation, that's making sound. And we have the smallest bones basically in our body are the ones in the ear. These 3 bones, they're very tiny. These are bones. So the structure, they're bones and their shape. So we need to talk about structure of these different bones. They're all bones. That's one part of their structure you should know. And also that they have these different shapes. One of them is shaped like a hammer, the other one like an anvil, and the third one like a stirrup. So hammer is obviously this. A anvil is this. And a stirrup is this. It's a stirrup. Alright, so what happens is when you've got sound waves coming in, so I'm going to just draw a compression wave, right? Compression means there's lots of particles close together. When that hits the membrane will push towards the actual malleus. That will activate the malleus. So the malleus will now push onto the anvil. The anvil gets pushed as well. That will push towards the stirrup, and then the last bone, the stirrup, pushes onto the outer window or the oval window. So basically, again, it's just a transfer of energy from the tympanic membrane to the oval window, and in between, the one thing that makes it happen are these ear ossicles, which all are shaped differently to allow movement, to allow the sound to be changed into mechanical energy, and then to be having activated these outer windows of the cochlea. And one thing as well, the stirrup is the smallest of the bones, and that's important when it comes to amplification. Amplification means we make the volume louder. So because this is smaller than the top one, what that basically means, any sound that comes from here is amplified. The volume is louder. So here, here, the amplification will happen, and then the sound will just be louder than it originally was. So amplification happens at the smallest bone. And the structure that makes that happen is a small part of that bone. In fact, that's really small. Right, so this is just another representation of it. You've got the eardrum being hit, then these bones will all hit, and you can see the stirrup hits the oval window, and when the oval window is hit, it's going to make the fluid inside move. And we're going to talk about the fluid in a second. Right, but that was the middle ear, and one thing you should remember about it is these ear ossicles. There's also the eustachian tube, which is this part here. It's also in the middle ear. We're going to cover that more in a different video. Right, last is the inner ear, and the inner ear is made up of lots of different things. This is probably the one which is the most numerous in terms of what we need to know. So we need to talk about the oval window, the round window, the cochlea, the organ of Corti, and the auditory nerve. All of these are part of the inner ear. So first of all, what is the cochlea? The cochlea is you can see it looks a bit like a snail. It's got a snail shape. And what I want you to imagine is if you were to cut it cross-sectionally like this, and then look at it, it will look like this. This is what it will look like, right? If you cut a bit of this part, this cochlea, cross-sectionally. So it basically has a bony wall. It has a bony wall, but it also has 3 chambers. So it's got 1 chamber, 2 chambers, 3 chambers. And these chambers are filled with different types of fluid, right? Perilymph and a different type of fluid. So these are filled with fluid, and this fluid can move. Right, so it's got, and then we have membranes separating the 3 chambers. So there's this membrane, which is called the Reissner membrane, the first that connects the outer and the middle. So this is the outer, this is the middle. And then there's the basilar membrane, which connects the middle layer to the inner layer, right? So 1, 2, 3, outer, middle, inner, and 2 membranes in between. And the most important part about this middle layer is that the middle layer connects to the organ of Corti. Now, what is the organ of Corti? So you can see here, this part here, the gray part is the basilar membrane. So that's the membrane. But on top of this membrane is the organ of Corti. Now, the organ of Corti is a couple of things. First of all, it's its own membrane, because you can see it folds into a membrane, this membrane here. But just below the membrane are our hair cells. We've talked about the hair cells in previous videos. Everything has these hair cells. These hair cells are what will actually detect the sound. So you can imagine there are nerves attached to this actual part here. They're nerve endings, which will send a signal onto the brain. And if this membrane moves, if this is pushed down, then the membrane will push onto the hair cells, and then the hair cells will be activated and will send a signal on towards the brain. right? So this membrane pushes down on the hair cells are activated, and an electrochemical impulse is sent towards the brain for these neurons that are attached to it, right? That's the organ of Corti. So this part here is the organ of Corti, and the organ of Corti is attached to the basilar membrane, which was a membrane in between 2 and 3 here, right? Alright, so let me go over the concept of how this works. I've kind of covered a bit of detail in terms of these different structures, but we have the stapes, which are connected to the oval window. The oval window is like the outer window, the thing that connects the middle and the inner ear, right? So once this stapes pushes onto it, the oval window, this oval window is a membrane. So the structure has a membrane, and it will feel the pressure. So you can say it feels the pressure and transfers the pressure from the stapes onto the fluid, because there's actually lots of fluid inside. I mentioned the fluid, right? So once this actual stape pushes onto it, all the fluid in that cochlea will start moving, especially ones which are closest to the actual stapes. It will start moving, right? Now this is the important part, right? So once it starts moving, then it can move. So it'll move here, it'll move in this direction, it'll move towards your face when you're watching this. So I can't draw 3D, but you can imagine it's coming towards you. But whilst it's also doing this, it's pushing on this membrane. So when the water pushes on the membrane number 2, right, the first membrane, the Meissner membrane, sorry, the Reissner membrane, the water pushes on the Reissner membrane. That's going to make the water in the second chamber move. So the water in the second chamber is now moving because you've got pushing happening from the top outer layer. And that second movement will then push against the membrane of the third as well, right? Because water just pushes when it's being pushed. So that the water in the second chamber will push onto the membrane of the actual third membrane. So this, I'm sorry, I'll do this again. When water is activated from the Reissner membrane, it will make water move in the second chamber. That movement from the second chamber will activate the basilar membrane, because it'll just push onto it. And when the basilar membrane is pushed onto, it'll also activate the organ of Corti, right? So you've got water pushing onto the organ of Corti, and then that organ of Corti activates the hair cells, and these which are part of the organ of Corti, and that sends a signal to the actual brain. And then we've got the last thing, which was the round window. The round window, it's just, you can imagine we've got all this pressure coming in, right? We've got all this pressure coming in, and we want to make sure we can remove that pressure still. So the round window would just be basically kind of somewhere a bit lower, round window, and this is the exit part. So this is where all that pressure leaves again. It's going to hit the round window, and then the pressure is going to be gone. So pressure starts happening at the oval window, and then it'll make a loop down, and the pressure is gone once it hits the round window. So you can imagine oval window entry, round window exit. And then we still have the auditory canal, auditory nerve. That was just this nerve here. So you can imagine all of these. Here, this is the organ of Corti. We've got all these hair cells being activated. They send a signal, and then they converge. So they meet at the auditory nerve. So it's like the optic nerve in the eye. The auditory nerve is the same thing for the brain. That's sends the signal to the brain itself. That nerve will meet up in the brain, right? So these were the structures you need to know for the inner ear. I'm going to cover all of it again really quickly. The next video will also summarize it all again as well. Right, so the outer ear is the pinna and the tympanic membrane. This would be the pinna would have been that your earlobe, and not the earlobe, but the funnel shape that makes sure makes sure sound can enter. We've got the tympanic membrane, which is the thing that will move when sound hits it. That movement of the sound will activate the ear ossicles, and there's 3 different bones. That was the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. They will start moving, and they will push onto the round oval window, which is this part here. That was the oval window, right? So when the oval window is activated, that will push the fluid inside these chambers. It will push the fluid, so it will create movement in the fluid, and that will push against these different types of membranes. We talked about the Meissner membrane and the basilar membrane, but all this pushing basically makes the organ of Corti move, or the hairs in the organ of Corti move. And the organ of Corti was the hair cells that will then be activated when the membrane pushes onto it, and that will send a signal towards the brain via the auditory nerve. So the organ of Corti, each hair cell has its own nerve, and then they eventually all combine to make an auditory nerve. So that's what these were. The cochlea was just the whole thing, right? So the whole thing, all of it together, these bony structures, the 3 chambers, the 2 membranes, plus the organ of Corti, all that would be the cochlea. So that's the cochlea. And then the round window, so you can see pressure, so the fluid will move this way, but it will also push down. So it will push down on these membranes. And then the pressure will come out on the other side again and leave at the round window. So the round window is the exit part. So all the pressure will push against the round window, and then the pressure is removed. That's the point of the round window. Round window is the pressure removing part, and the oval window is the pressure sort of entry part. That's where pressure enters, and at the round window, pressure leaves. But hope that was useful.